In modern times, the existence of giants has largely been dismissed as a myth, but tales concerning legendary creatures of enormous stature are woven into the historical fabrics of cultures all over the world. From the Philippines to Norway, North America to Japan, a multitude of cultures and civilizations have remarkably similar legends concerning bipedal creatures of enormous stature. There are far too many of these legends to investigate in just one short video, so we may have to keep the scope of this documentary primarily focused on the giants of Western mythology. Giants are usually characterized as inhuman monsters with a taste for human flesh, along with cattle, sheep, wild game, and any other living creature they might be unlucky enough to stumble across. They are often depicted as being the predecessors of humankind, demigods or demonic figures who are eventually overthrown in a series of armored conflicts by either the new gods or the unified efforts of humanity itself. Giants appear in the theological histories of many different religions. In fact, they play a major role in one of the oldest and most influentially written works in the history of the world, the Christian Holy Bible. Giants are referenced dozens of times in multitudes of books in the Old Testament. The earliest description of towering humanoids living amongst us comes in Genesis 6:4, which says, "The Nephilim were on earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God had relation with the daughters of men, and they bore them children whom became the mighty men of old, men of renown." The Hebrew word Nephilim has been translated to giants in many versions of the Bible. This is largely due to the early Greek translation of the Old Testament and their choice of wording. They substituted gigantus in place of Nephilim, an alteration that made sense from their own cultural standpoint. Gigantus were an ancient race in Greek and Roman mythology, warriors who were noted for their strength and prowess. This translation was carried on into the early medieval versions of the Bible. However, Nephilim actually means the fallen ones. This verse is widely believed to refer to a group of rebellious angels, the sons of God, who descended to earth in order to couple with human females, the daughters of man. This ultimately produced the Nephilim, the mighty men of old, a lineage of hulking demigods who eventually mated with humans and spawned several races of hybrid mortal giants. In the book of Numbers, God instructs Moses to send spies on a reconnaissance mission into the land of Canaan, which he has promised to Moses and his people. The spies paint a dire picture for Moses and his assembled army upon their return, saying, "The people who live there are powerful, and the cities are fortified and very large. We even saw descendants of Anak there." Physically superior opponents in cities surrounded by fortified walls presented a daunting challenge, but the Anakites in particular were very bad news. They were known to be one of the 4 races of giants who were spawned by the original Nephilim. Desperate to prevent the wholesale slaughter of their people, the spies went on to say, "We are in our own eyes as grasshoppers." And so we were in their eyes. Arguably the most famous of the biblical giants, Goliath of Gath, was a Philistine warrior who may have been descended from the Anakite bloodline, as they were known to reside in the area of Gath. During the battle between King Saul of the Israelites and the Philistines in the Valley of Elah, Goliath would step out between the opposing lines twice a day and demand that King Saul send a champion to face him in single combat. No one was willing to take the challenge, including Saul himself, who was a full head taller than any man in Israel. As large as Saul may have been, he was dwarfed by Goliath, who stood 6 cubits and a span, or roughly 9 feet 9 inches in height. This mighty giant was clad in 250 pounds of bronze armor, and the shaft of his spear weighed as much as an average man. The spearhead itself is said to have tipped the scales at 15 pounds. Goliath was killed by divine intervention working through the hand of young David, who faced the giant with only a wooden staff and his sling. Goliath sneered at the young man and mocked his God. David answered by saying, "This day the Lord will deliver you into my hand, and I will strike you down." True to his word, David loaded his sling and felled Goliath with a single stone to the forehead, and then cut off his head for a trophy. The scenario of a lone hero prevailing over a seemingly invulnerable giant plays out repeatedly in the lore of many different nations. Realistically, engaging such a formidable creature in a fight to the death would be unlikely to turn out well for the human combatant, which suggests that many of these stories are thinly veiled moralistic parables, about courage in the face of overwhelming odds. If you take their legends at face value, it would appear the ancient people of Greece were absolutely beleaguered by the wide variety of giants. They believed the sky mated with Earth and produced 18 colossal children, the 12 Titans, the 300 Handers, and a trio of one-eyed monsters, the Cyclops. There were also a number of primordial giants who had existed since the dawn of creation, such as Argus, the all-seeing, a creature with many eyes who was inevitably tasked by Hera to watch over Io, one of Zeus's many lovers. After the gods defeated the Titans and took their place as the new deities of mankind, their sexual encounters with mortal women resulted in even more giants, which is strikingly similar to the origin of the Nephilim in the Book of Genesis. Many of these god or human hybrids were man-eating monsters such as Caucasus, the fire-breathing son of the god Vulcan. Caucasus had a fondness for human flesh, and he was known to nail the heads of his victims to the entrance of his cave. When the Romans rose to power, they established a sprawling empire as they conquered their way across Europe. As their spire of influence grew wider and wider, their cultural patchwork of adopted Greek and Abrahamic folktales met and mingled with those of the people who were absorbed into their dominion. This resulted in a melting pot of giant mythology across the continent. In Armenian lore, the state of Armenia was purported to have been created by a race of giants led by Hak, a charismatic leader who helped create the legendary Tower of Babel from the Book of Genesis. He is also said to have killed Nimrod in combat, a large king, and the great-grandson of Noah, slaying him during a conflict between two armies of giants. Mount Nemrut is known to have been named in honor of this legendary battle. The Basque County in northern Spain was home to the Gentil, a race of pre-Christian giants who were said to be the builders of the Neolithic monuments that can be found in the region. According to Basque folklore, the Gentil were 12 feet in height and weighed up to 1,600 pounds. They were thought to be responsible for massive boulders that were found in unlikely places. It is said the Gentil would hurl immense rocks during violent conflicts with each other, altering the face of the landscape during its war. With Christianity spreading like wildfire across the empire, the Gentil were thought to have been banished from the earth upon the birth of Jesus, driven underground by God, who spoke to them through a luminous cloud. Reflecting the intrusive introduction of Roman culture, the denizens of the Basque County sometimes refer to the giants as Sanson, a clear reference to the biblical strongman Samson. In addition, there is a Basque legend that tells of a one-eyed giant known as Tartal, an enormously strong behemoth who bears more than a passing resemblance to the Cyclops faced by Odysseus in Homer's Odyssey. Ancient Britain became home to the legend of Gog and Magog, a pair of giants with a long and twisted lineage. Their names were first mentioned in the Old Testament as Gog, a warrior prince who resided in the land of Magog. Gog was chosen by God to lead an alliance of nearby kingdoms in an invasion of Israel. In later biblical writings, Gog and Magog were two distinct and inherently civilized heathens who wished to join forces with Satan to bring upon the end of days. When Roman influence filtered into British mythology, Gog and Magog became known as a pair of giants who were captured after a battle with the Trojan prince Brutus, the conqueror of Britain. They were pressed into service as gatekeepers for the city of New Troy, which eventually became the city of London. There is different traditional tales that join the two names together as Gog-Magog, a giant chieftain of Cornwall, who was slain in battle by Brutus's champion, Corineus. Nordic mythology brought us the Jotun, primordial beings who grew from the dismembered bodies of Ymir, a primeval god whose murder at the hands of Odin and his brothers resulted in the creation of the cosmos. They were usually at war with gods who resided in Asgard. In particular, the thunder god Thor, who personally killed many Jotun in a number of bloody skirmishes. It's interesting to note the similarities between Nordic and Greek mythology. In folklore of both cultures, the gods turned against the giants who preceded them, usurping their power and killing them off in the process. In turn, scholars have identified Ymir as being modeled on the Proto-Germanic god Twisto, based on the writing of the Roman senator and historian Tacitus in the 1st century AD. Going back even further in time, comparative mythology and historical linguistics suggest that Twisto and Ymir are both echoes of even older gods, long-forgotten creations, figures who originate in Proto-Indo-European mythology. Although they were separate from the Old World and its people by several thousands of miles of ocean, the native people of North America also believed in predatory creatures of enormous size. Iroquois folklore brought us the dreaded giant known as Stonecoat, a ravenous beast whose skin was covered by rock-hard scales, rendering it impervious to their arrows. Northeastern tribes almost universally feared the infamous Wendigo, a type of ice cannibal that was known as the Chino by the Micmac and the Witico by the Cree. These frosty giants were twice as tall as an average man, and were frequently portrayed as people who had lost their humanity due to engaging in immoral behavior. In some variations of the legend, the Wendigo could mimic the personalities and appearance of its last victim. The Wendigo's former human self was encased within its icy heart. The only way to destroy it was to somehow kill the human trapped inside. The Wendigo was associated with winter, and it could be speculated that they represented a deep-seated fear of the cannibalism that occurred when isolated tribes ran out of food before spring arrived. Moving further southwest, the state of Nevada offered something very unusual within the whimsical realm of myth and folklore. Verified evidence that suggested a legend might actually be a reality. In the oral traditions of the Paiute culture, there was a long and bitter struggle with a band of cannibalistic red-haired giants they referred to as the Sitka. After many violent skirmishes with the animalistic giants, a regional coalition of tribes declared war and ruthlessly wiped them out, eventually trapping the remaining Sitka in Lovelock Cave. When they refused to come out and engage in one last honorable battle to the death, the Paiute piled dry brush at the mouth of the cave and set it aflame, suffocating their foes and destroying them, once and for all. Now, this could all be dismissed as yet another tidbit of allegorical folklore from the distant past. But in the fall of 1911, a mummified remains of some unusually large cadavers were discovered in Lovelock Cave by a pair of guano miners. A written report by one of the miners stated that in the north-central part of the cave, approximately 4 feet deep, they discovered a striking-looking body of a man that was at least 6 feet 6 inches in length, enormous in stature for the era in which he died. The corpse had distinctively red hair. Also found in the cave was a sandal 15 inches long, and a number of human bones that had been split open to extract the marrow. Unfortunately, most of the remains and artifacts they found were destroyed in the mining process, and the best preserved of the corpses was boiled down to the bones by a local fraternal lodge for initiation purposes. However, investigators were able to date the surviving artifacts as being roughly 2,000 years old. In 1952, the enormous sandal was put on display in the Nevada Historical Society's museum in the city of Reno. The artifacts found in Lovelock Cave may very well be the only verifiable evidence ever discovered, which might confirm the existence of an unusually large race of humanoids. In modern times, an individual who stands at a height of 6.5 feet is by no means a giant, but 2,000 years ago, people were generally much smaller in stature. At 6.5 feet, the mummified corpse would have been a full 12 or 13 inches taller than the average adult male in Europe at the time. If the remains in question had come from an average-sized Sitka, it stands to reason that there would have been a number of even larger members of his tribe. Average height is closely tied to nutrition. A reliable source of protein over the span of many generations will raise the average height of a population, whereas repeated famines and stresses on food supply will result in a decline. If the Sitka were habitual cannibals, as detailed in the legend, they would have enjoyed a rather grisly dietary advantage over the Paiute in times of hardship. The discovery in Lovelock Cave is undeniably a compelling anecdote from Cryptozoology, given the geological location of the deceased, his distinctive red hair, the sheer size of the skeleton, and the presence of human bones which had been carefully split open to harvest the marrow. With these 4 points in mind, a sound argument could be made in favor of the Sidaka being more than simply legendary figures in folklore. They stand alone in this respect, despite persistent rumors to the contrary. There has been no other reliable evidence brought forth to support the existence of any other mythical giant. All over the world, man-made relics suggest humankind once believed giants walked the face of the earth, such as the Matsiang footprints in southern Botswana. But no direct remnants of these massive creatures has ever been found. However, as awful as they may have been, the monstrous man-roasting Sidaka were undoubtedly fellow Homo sapiens with some very unusual genetic traits. Unlike the demonic iron club-wielding Oni of Japanese tradition, the Sidaka were portrayed by kaeo legend as mortal beings, not demons or leftover demigods from the days of old. This is a notable deviation from the standard explanation of other giants and their origins, especially when one takes into account the lack of physical traces that might corroborate these legends. Nonetheless, when the timeline of a mystery extends far enough into the distant past, physical evidence isn't necessarily the be-all, end-all. One must take into account the imprint which was left on the collective psyche of humanity. At some point in prehistory, our early ancestors had a series of encounters that inspired countless generations worth of oral tradition. While many legends eventually slip into the wayside and are forgotten, the stories of the giants, who once made the earth tremble, have remained until the present day. Ultimately, the existence of giants can neither be proven nor debunked without generating some debate. Although it's true that no archaeologist has ever unearthed the enormous femur or skull of an unidentified species of humanoid, the fact that belief in these behemoths is so universally unsure demands some consideration. In the end, all that remains of these behemoths of old are a handful of monuments, a series of tall tales, and one singular sandal found in a cave in Nevada. Until new evidence is brought to the public eye, the mystery behind the giant myth will remain yet another unsolved puzzle in the fascinating field of cryptozoology. Hey there kids, it's me, MrCreepyPasta, and I just wanted to tell you thank you for watching tonight's video. Because this is October, I'm going to make this nice, short, and sweet. If you'd like to help support the show or the podcast, head over to patreon.com/MrCreepyPasta. If you'd like to get yourself some new Halloween and Creepypasta-inspired teas, you can head over to etsy.com/shop/ivorymonocletea. And if you want to catch me, CreepsMcPasta, and Myuu during our live Halloween tour around the southern US, head over to creepypasta.shofetti.com. That's creepypasta.shofetti.com. Hang on to your hats, kids, because this year is a 31-day Halloween countdown. Happy Halloween and sweet dreams.